Shout out to SqSp for sponsoring! In the early 90s I was attending Cromer Junior School. Here it is on Google Maps. It was converted into housing the year after I left, but as you can see, it's an old school. Cromer is a seaside town located in Norfolk, on the east coast of England. It's not a huge town, but it has a good tourist location and, importantly, a beach. A beach meant swimming. It also meant that teaching swimming was high on the agenda of the local school. For us, that meant a short trip to Cromer High School every other week in order to use their fairly dilapidated swimming pool. This pool was shared by various schools in the region, with all lessons taught by one man, Mr. Brooklander. For years, we frequented these lessons all taught by this one noble lone man, until one day the lessons stopped and a letter was sent home. Brooklander was dead, seemingly from natural causes. From that point onwards we had a different swimming teacher. I can't even recall their name. That is until high school started, and of course they used the same pool. A few weeks in I went into a swimming lesson, and there was Mr. Brooklander, apparently alive and well, noble as ever and eager to teach us how to swim. How the actual did this occur? No one knows, but what I do know is that my best friend, Michael, who had also moved up from Cromer Junior School, experienced the same thing. We got a letter home, Brooklander was dead, a year later he was teaching us. Weirdly, he then died a year or two later, again apparently, and we got a letter home saying the same thing as last time. It's easy to write this off as tricks of the mind, but it happened. I experienced the whole process. This isn't something I made up years later. I was as shocked to see him then as I am talking about it now. I talked about it at the time, I talked to my parents about it, Michael remembers it even though we're in different year groups, but everyone else seems to just shrug it off. What gives? Did my friend and I split onto an alternative parallel universe somehow? Are we all just weaving in and out of a slightly different timeline, convening, parting, reconvening? Or were Michael and I utterly tripping balls? This localized phenomenon we experienced now has a name. It's called the Mandela Effect, and it's called that because a huge swathe of people seem to remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison sometime in the 80s. He of course didn't. He was released from prison in 1990, becoming the first president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999, and then dying in 2013. It was paranormal researcher Fiona Broom who coined the term after sharing her clear memory of Mandela having died during the 80s, and since then it's been used to describe hundreds of instances where collective memories seem to differ from reality. So what gives? Is there something we're missing? Was something misconstrued? Or is something a whole lot weirder going on? Well, I'll come back to that later. Usually the Mandela Effect applies to things we don't really pay full attention to, or where we presume something without looking at all the facts. Let's take some well-known examples. In 1851, textile mill owners Robert and Benjamin Knight founded the BB&R Knight Corporation in Rhode Island, United States. 5 years later they established the brand Fruit of the Loom whilst producing muslin cloths. A friend, Rufus Skeel, sold produce from the mill, with Skeel's daughter painting images of fruit on various cloth bolts. These images would quickly form the basis of the logo of the new brand, featuring a medley of fruits in front of a cornucopia. The cornucopia itself, a horn-shaped container often used to symbolise abundance and plenty. But the cornucopia was never part of the logo. Ever. It was just a simple collection of fruits, even as far back as this 1921 advert.
How did I make it big? I know how! To play the game, I buy real estate.
Now, we all know the Monopoly Man, or Mr. Monopoly, to state his official name. Although Parker Brothers got hold of the Monopoly rights in 1935, the character actually evolved over a decade later, depicted as a sophisticated older gentleman from the early 20th century. He was originally taken from the 1946 Parker Brothers game Rich Uncle. Now, you might expect that rich Uncle Pennybags would wear a monocle. After all, it fits with his image, and indeed most of us remember that to be the case. However, he never did. Never has. This memory seems to be so strong that even newspapers would reference the character's monocle well before we delve down this Mandela Effect rabbit hole. Let's move on to Disney. Now, from the release of Return to Oz in 1985, Disney consistently started using an intro depicting Cinderella's castle at Walt Disney World in Florida. There are variations, but the main core depiction is this flat castle with the blue background. But a lot of people seem to remember a version of this, including me, where Tinkerbell flies around the castle, writes out the Disney logo and then dots the I before flying off again. The thing is, this intro doesn't seem to exist. How about Looney Tunes, a product of Warner Brothers designed to rival Disney and their Mickey Mouse character? This whole escapade started way back in 1930 with the short animation Sinking in the Bathtub. The series then spawned a huge wave of associated characters and animations. We all remember watching Looney Tunes on a Sunday morning, right? Well, wrong. It is, and apparently always was, Looney Tunes. That doesn't make sense, right? We're watching a cartoon, not a symphony, so it must have been Looney Tunes. The one thing most of the famous Mandela effects have is that they are mascots, branding, title screens, logos, things we see often. That may indeed be the reason why they're so famous, but it could also indicate that maybe we're just not paying attention to the details. We're skimming over it. After all, we've seen these a million times. It's already ingrained in our brains, right? Okay, so maybe we should look past the title screens and onto the content itself. As we're on cartoons, let's stick with that. We'll go back to Mickey Mouse. Now, this one hit me hard. It was actually whilst I was researching this video when I saw a thread mentioning Mickey Mouse's suspenders. Immediately, my brain envisaged a scene from the 1928 animation Steamboat Willie, where Mickey Mouse is standing, whistling, swaying back and forth, and he snaps his suspenders. Now, this memory was so clear as day in my mind, yet it's not in the animation at all. Mickey doesn't even snap some pretend suspenders, as some have suggested. There's no suspenders or any sign of suspenders whatsoever. Okay, how about the 1969 Hanna-Barbera cartoon Dastardly and Muttley in Their Flying Machines, a spin-off of the Wacky Races series depicting our duo attempting to catch a messenger pigeon named Yankee Doodle Pigeon. Okay, now remember the Catch the Pigeon intro scene? Sure you do. Catch the pigeon, catch the pigeon. It's not catch the pigeon. It's stop the pigeon.
So, stop the pigeon, stop the pigeon.
Yes, even comments on YouTube are in bewilderment. Some people claim there must have been a UK-only dub, but this isn't like a Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles situation. There was no dub. This just keeps happening. I'll tell you what else keeps happening. Incredible websites, but only when sponsor SqSp is involved. You can pick from so many styles and use Blueprint AI to get the best layout and style options, along with optimized SEO tools so that you can show up in Google for the keywords that matter. It's just easy to snap features in and out, but one of my favourite abilities is to swap between mobile and desktop views so that you can optimize your content for every device and make sure it looks great. Just head to SquareSpace for a free trial, and when you're ready, go to squarespace.com/nostalgianerd to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
What letter does Apple start with?
So maybe we should turn to video games. After all, they're consistent, especially older releases that lack DLC and updates. But more importantly, we spent a lot of time playing these games. We scrutinized every damn pixel, looked for every hidden room, every cheat code, every cool animation. So surely we'd be experts on everything there is to know. But from Black Ops signs appearing out of the blue, to imagined multiplayer experiences in Halo 2, to the playable Red Robin character in Mortal Kombat 2, there are many instances of reported false memories in our games as well. And they don't seem to have a single point of origin. No, these are shared memories consistent around the globe. One of the most well known is from Super Mario Bros. On the NES, released in November 1985. For many, it's their first gaming experience, from their first jump to their first encounter with that piranha plant on World 1-1. Yeah? No, turns out there is no piranha plant in level 1 of Super Mario Bros. Most players seem to remember there being a plant on the third pipe before you go down into it. They seem to recall entering the pipe, going through the bonus screen and exiting at the end of stage 1, but no matter which version you play, it doesn't exist. The plants don't appear until the second level underground. This is a memory that's shared so far and wide that people recreate the piranha in Super Mario Maker. There are countless Reddit threads, forum posts and comments of people gobsmacked that they can't find this gobbling plant. Okay, so in 1996, Pokemon Red and Green were released for the Nintendo Game Boy, introducing us to Pikachu, designed by Atsuko Nishida. Witnessing his popularity, the third game released worldwide, Pokemon Yellow, features Pikachu on the box art, although the tip of his tail is cut off. The black tip of his tail. Right? Wrong. Pikachu doesn't have a black tip on his tail. He never did. On his ears, sure, but never on his tail. Despite this, you'll find a shed-load of fan art depicting Pikachu with a black tip on his tail. Even AI is getting in on the action. Another Nintendo false memory is on Mario Kart 64, released in December 1996 and offering a gigantic step up in graphical finesse over the Super Nintendo iteration. Just like the Super Nintendo version, we were graced with a Rainbow Road level, notorious for being one of the most difficult tracks throughout the series, mainly because if you slide too far, you're a goner. Players from around the world can be found on forums and posts furious with the difficulty of the N64's Rainbow Road, constantly having to be saved by fishing Lakitu, and usually ranking in the bottom half of proceedings because of it. However, despite so many memories attesting this, N64 Rainbow Road has guardrails along the sides of the entire track, meaning that unless you hopped around like a nutcase, it was pretty darn hard to actually fall off. There are people in Reddit posts claiming that they must have been privy to an early version of the game, and at some point Nintendo clearly released a better, bug-fixed version, but we know very well that wouldn't happen. If a game was ready to be shipped, it was shipped, and that's how it stayed. Perhaps we could explain it by people associating early preview screenshots with their playing experience. I've definitely done that before, but no matter where you look and which pre-release build you look at, all versions of Mario Kart 64 had the rails in place on Rainbow Road. So, what's going on here? There are countless theories on what's occurring. Some of the chief ones are based around quantum mechanics and the multiverse theory, where we're all indeed flitting from one reality to the next, with our memories from the previous universe still intact in some instances. It's been discussed on documentaries, podcasts, and countless times in the media, but I'd like something a bit more scientific than that, if you don't mind. In 2022, Deeprasari Prasad and Wilma A. Bainbridge from the Department of Psychology at the University of Chicago produced a paper titled The Visual Mandela Effect as Evidence for Shared and Specific False Memories Across People. And after having a chat with Wilma Bainbridge, I found myself knee-deep in a world where we look at the Mandela Effect as a psychological phenomenon with potential cause and effect. So let's disseminate it. In this study, 4 different tests were performed. The first was to present a range of graphics to 100 participants to determine whether they could identify the canonical versions correctly. This included 22 characters, 16 brand logos and 2 symbols. Of these, a manipulated version was introduced with a well-known visual Mandela effect, or VME, alteration, alongside an alternative manipulation offering a subtle difference but not one known to be a VME. Participants were then asked to gauge their confidence in selecting the correct option, their familiarity with the graphic, and how many times they believe they'd seen the logo before. Every manipulation was selected at least once. However, the VMEs for C3PO, Fruit of the Loom, Curious George, Pikachu, Monopoly Man, Volkswagen, and Where's Waldo, or Wally for us Brits, was much more significant than the others. These famously being common Mandela Effect memories. Interestingly, Tom from Tom and Jerry was also quite high. the difference in shade seemingly another common false memory. However, it doesn't rank high enough to fall outside of chance, but all of the core VMEs were identified with a high familiarity and confidence. Mistakes made on the other graphic identifications were of a lower confidence. So this indicates that people who identified the VME logos were very confident of their accuracy compared to your average misidentification. Experiment 2 was to take a second group and present participants with a canonical graphic as a blurred image for 250 milliseconds, and then give them a mouse controllable aperture to view the image for at least 5 seconds, designed to mimic eye movement. They were then asked to select whether they saw a manipulated version or the canonical version. Participants who were shown the Monopoly Man, C3PO, Fruit of the Loom, Curious George, Pikachu, Waldo and the Volkswagen logo were far less likely to choose the correct image, at 52% compared with 82.4% for non-VME images. Of those who selected the correct version, they tended to note a specific feature in identifying the graphic, such as they only saw the fruit, not the cornucopia. However, of those who selected the VME, they did the same. I'm pretty sure it had a basket, for example. In fact, those who gave the incorrect match were more likely to attribute it to the memory of a feature that wasn't present in the original, at 66.5%. Among other questions to search for bias, participants were also asked what they thought the study was about, with only 8.6% mentioning the Mandela Effect or false memory. A third experiment was then conducted to determine if prior exposure to altered VME images in real-world contexts could have influenced memory errors. To do this, result sets were scraped from Google to analyse the prevalence of canonical versus VME versions. The result was that most icons were predominantly represented in their canonical form, apart from C3PO and Waldo, who had a higher occurrence of VME versions, which could explain errors due to prior exposure. For Fruit of the Loom, VME errors preceded widespread exposure to the manipulated version, suggesting other factors at play. The final experiment was to test whether VME errors would occur during free recall of images. To do this, participants were first gauged as to whether they were familiar with a logo or not. If they were, then they were given an unlimited amount of time to draw the graphic from memory. If they were not, then they were shown the Canon graphic and then asked to draw it from short-term memory. The outcome of this was that almost half of long-term memory drawings of the 7 subset included VME errors. However, for those unfamiliar with the imagery, drawing from short-term memory still in fact led to over 20% of participants recreating VME errors in their drawing. This increased dramatically to 100% for C3PO, with all drawings depicting that he had 2 gold legs rather than 1. For control images outside of this subset, there were only 7% of drawing errors overall, suggesting that VME apparent images for some reason uniquely elicit consistent false memories, whether the participant has just been exposed to them or not. The paper concludes that VME is a genuine psychological phenomenon with shared consistent memory errors across people in both short-term and long-term memory, but is far more apparent with particular depictions, suggesting that one reason is due to schema-driven perception. Schema theory suggests that people use pre-existing knowledge structures, or schemas, to fill in gaps in memory. This process often results in scheme-consistent errors where details aligning with expectations are falsely remembered. This can alone explain many of the current visual Mandela effects. Take rich Uncle Pennybags. Our brains associate this rich, top-hat-wearing character with the likes of Mr. Peanut, Charles Coburn, and other such stereotypical wealthy portrayals, who all happen to have a monocle, and so we tend to assume that Pennybags has one too. If we take a character like the Fat Controller, or Sir Topham Hatt if you prefer from Thomas the Tank Engine, the same is often true. There are forums, Reddit posts and even polls asking where his monocle is, with respondents weirdly giving accuracy at about the same percentage as the second test of the research paper. Of course, he doesn't have one, and this isn't as common a VME situation, but he does have the top hat and tails we associate with the monocle. Now, we could also use this to explain the Looney Tunes problem. If you look back at the 90s, even newspapers would write entire articles referencing Looney Tunes instead of tunes, because that made the most sense. It fit the cartoon schema better than tunes ever would, and of course, loon rhymes with tune. Not forgetting that Americans pronounce tune as tune anyway. But if we replace that schema with the actual backstory that in the 1920s Disney originally created short films set to music called silly symphonies, Warner Brothers wanted a piece of this action, so created two of their own short film sets called Merry Melodies and Looney Tunes, and this stuck even when the music became less of a show. Then we can update that schema with something which makes sense. Without it, our brain just has to hear the homophone of Looney Tunes and click, our memory is set to what follows the cartoon schema. In the same way, catching a pigeon which is actually depicted in the cartoon makes far more sense than stopping a pigeon, and this could easily be an instance where we're recalling something that fits the situation over something that doesn't make as much sense. Almost as if our pattern recognizing minds are correcting the discrepancies. To a lesser degree, this can also explain the Pikachu VME. Although Pikachu's tail never had a black tip, his ears definitely did, so it's fair to assume this pattern carries through to the tail, especially when squinting at a low resolution Game Boy screen where it's difficult to tell one way or another. A 2015 research paper by Deborah Sears Miles of Fielding Graduate University came up with similar problems whilst exploring whether experiences in virtual environments, such as video games, can lead to false memories, where individuals confuse virtual memories with real-life experiences. Although the results of this study were inconclusive, it found that participants were remembering items they expected to be in each virtual or real setting depending on the environment. For example, in mocked-up offices, participants recalled there being notebooks and pens when in fact there weren't any. This is again schema consistent, where gaps in their memory were filled with objects they expected but did not necessarily see. However, this isn't the only explanation. Prasad and Brainbridge also conclude that there are other causes at play, some of which entangle, distorting our memories somewhat. We call this source confusion, and it means that we interchange certain memories or associate certain memories with material other than the original source. Even when participants had extensive exposure to canonical versions of the graphics, occasional encounters with altered versions caused interference with accurate recall. We can in fact apply this to Looney Tunes as well.
We're tiny, we're toony.
Simply because a spin-off made by Warner Brothers in the 90s, Tiny Toon Adventures, did actually use the word toon, with very similar styling to the original series, which could easily cause confusion between the two. We can also apply this to Rainbow Road on the N64. Sure, it has rails, but Rainbow Road on other versions, including the Super Nintendo, doesn't. The fact that you can still fall off the track by flying over the rails could cause some memory entanglement. This can be further enhanced if you've ever played the Mario Kart 8 version of N64 Rainbow Road, because a lot of it does not in fact have those rails. It's the same for Super Mario. The first level doesn't have the Piranha, but World 2-1 does, as does Super Mario Bros. 3 World 1-1. They're not on the third pipe, they're on the first, but this could easily be an example of memory bleeding into another. We can also apply this to C-3PO. Although the film version of a character has one silver leg, most depictions outside of that, including the original toys, feature two golden legs. It makes perfect sense then that we'd expect the same in the film. Also, it's silver, it reflects everything, including his other gold leg and the sand, so it's gonna look gold. Plus, most of us watched this on VHS. With that kind of quality, we never stood a chance, and it's safe to assume his entire body is gold. If we take Steamboat Willie, although Mickey Mouse doesn't wear braces, there is a parody in season 4 of The Simpsons called Steamboat Itchy, where Scratchy appears wearing braces whilst rocking back and forth whilst whistling. He, however, doesn't snap his braces, as I and others remember, But there are instances in the media, toys and even Disney animations where Mickey himself does wear suspenders, including the 1937 animation Clock Cleaners, suggesting maybe this memory originates from somewhere else. Which itself is another problem. Over the years we have lost a lot of media. The number of promotional trailers that appeared on certain TV channels but which no longer exist are numerous. This could in part explain the Disney Tinkerbell introduction. Certainly there's no sign of it in the standard Disney introductions, however we do get inklings of it in certain special intros. Various Wonderful World of Disney intros do actually depict something pretty similar, as does the 1997 video The Magic Behind the Masterpiece, a film about the making of Bambi. But no matter how hard we look, it is entirely possible that some media is just lost to time, leading us and others to continually gaslight ourselves about its existence. Of course, there are countless other famous Mandela effects, most of which can be explained away with these principles and quite often a combination of them. Lots of people seem to remember seeing the full alien's face at the end of Men in Black, but imagination can be a powerful thing, and if something isn't complete, we'll fill in the blanks, especially when we're kids. However, there will always be people who swear blind about what they saw or heard, and maybe they did. No one is privy to the experience of anyone else, at least not on a mental level, so who are we to correct someone's reality when we've never experienced it ourselves? Our experiences, and therefore our memories, even of the same incident, vary hugely. Things worth memorizing for one person might simply be worthless to another. Take Brooklander. That was clearly a powerful and important memory for me and Michael, but to others it wasn't even worth noting. But it is worth noting that the human mind is incredibly susceptible to manipulation. We all like to assume we're reasonable and rational, but hearing your friend Doug sing the incorrect version of a cartoon theme tune or create some fan art that doesn't quite match the original will always compound seeds of doubt that can very quickly become canonical in our own minds. So what about the most famous of them all? The reason why it's even called the Mandela Effect in the first place? Well, I took it upon myself to do a deep dive into this and discover why, if any reason, people believed that Nelson Mandela did actually die in prison in the 80s. We're not talking just a notion put forward by Fiona Broome. Thousands of people share this memory, and like most other Mandela effects, there are countless forum posts, Reddit threads, and videos attesting to this. Although, ironically, Fiona Broome's website herself has completely disappeared. Did we imagine that? It's not even in archive.org. Huh. Some claim to have heard that Mandela died in the 80s on the news, whilst others, like Black Cat 11, claim they heard it through school, with the class spending the remainder of the day talking about his life. Another commenter, Sweet Communication 51, claims to have also heard it in 1985 during school. And that's sort of significant, that's something you surely would remember. Of course, we know it's false because here's the video footage captured by various news outlets showing him being released from prison on the 11th of February 1990 at 6:14 local time. So clearly, these memories are problematic. But that's not to say they're made up or didn't happen. Maybe it's not the memory that's problematic, maybe it's the information we originally received that's problematic in some instances. I've done a lot of digging into this, and it seems that during 1985 in various newspapers there were stories running that actually claim Nelson Mandela had in fact died. It seems that various groups were trying to spread rumours that Mandela had died during 1985, and this clearly got back to us in the West. And even if you take the rumours out of the equation, there were stories appearing on a regular basis about Mandela's health and the fact that if he wasn't already dead, he could be dead very soon. There was a whole world of media seemingly designed to shock us, from rumours of life-threatening complications to him contracting diseases, all sorts. And this is an important explanation for a lot of Mandela effects and false memories. Sometimes as humans we get things wrong. We take things out of context, something is misconstrued, exaggerated, misunderstood, or someone just lies. And that stuff can stay with the recipient of that information for a long time, especially when we're young and impressionable. It can form a memory, and that memory can take on a life of its own. The longer it stays with us, the more it must be true, and sometimes it can be very difficult to question what we remember. It's not very nice to doubt ourselves, especially when what we actually remember wasn't the problem in the first place. For me, that's where Mandela lies. And that's also, I believe, where the Brooklander situation stemmed from and also lies. Whether I'm right or not, only history knows. Until next time, I've been Nostalgia Nerd. Toodaloo.